What is going on, everybody? In today's video, I'm going to be comparing a 2023 Nissan Frontier Pro-4x with a Ford Bronco. Okay, so I'm not quite sure how many people are cross-shopping these two, but I figured this would be a somewhat interesting video to talk about because they are both off-road SUVs and pickup trucks. This is the Pro-4x version of the Frontier, and that is the most off-road oriented version of the Frontier, and it is a mid-size pickup truck that is pretty capable overall, and I think this is a vehicle that doesn't need any introduction. It's the Ford Bronco. It is one of the most capable SUVs on the market, aside from like a Wrangler, and I thought it'd be interesting to compare the two in regards to exterior, interior appearances, specifications, pricing, and then finish off this video talking about which one of these two I would recommend you purchase depending on what situation you're in. So without further ado, let's start off with the styling. Now, starting off with the Frontier, I think this is a really good pickup truck. This is completely redesigned as of 2022, and then 2023 model year, which is this vehicle in front of me, has a few nice little added features and new trim levels, but aside from that, it is mostly unchanged from an exterior and interior appearance standpoint. You do have LED headlights up here, which look really good at night. They give it kind of this muscular, angular look to the front end. I can't say either one of these is better looking than the other. I think they're both really good looking. You do have some of this lava red badging, which is that kind of red accent all throughout down here with the recovery hooks. And then you do have LED fog lights as well. This is a fake vent over here, unfortunately, but other than that, it is a pretty good looking front end. You have this bulge fender flare and some more bulges over the hood, giving it just kind of a muscular, aggressive look. Coming over to the side, it is pretty more normal from the side point of view. Looks kind of more typical to every other mid-size pickup truck. But then coming over to the back, you have a little bit more of this plastic around the fender flare. And again, the Pro-4x badge with this large bulge for the rear fender. And then the rear end is also just as good looking. You have these LED taillights. You have the Pro-4x badge. Then you have Frontier just stamped into the tailgate. I think this is probably one of the best looking of the mid-size pickup trucks. This is pretty much the most updated. So I think that's why I think I like it the most. Now, one more thing to mention about the Frontier is you can get this optioned in a king cab configuration where this is kind of half the size of this door. That will give you a little bit less space in the back, but then you can option for a 6-foot bed as compared to the 5-foot bed that you're seeing on the screen right here. Now let's talk about the Ford Bronco. I think this is a vehicle you guys are well aware of. You've seen it on the channel. You've probably seen it on the roads. It's been around. It's pretty popular. Starting off with the rear end, you do have LED taillights on this particular version of mine. Mine's the Big Bend with the mid package, so it is kind of on the lower end of the trim levels that Ford offers, but it does have some nice amenities like those LED taillights. Now, mine does have the soft top and the removable doors, which all Ford Broncos come with, which is not something the Frontier offers. And you can get the Bronco in a 2-door configuration as well. So that's kind of a little bit more similar to the Frontier, but still, obviously, they're two different types of vehicles. One is an SUV, one is a pickup truck. But I really like the styling of this thing. It's very boxy, very square. Coming over to the front, I also have LED headlights similar to the Nissan Frontier, and mine are the upgraded LEDs. So they look a little bit different than the ones that come on the base model. But nonetheless, either option do get LED headlights. And the front end looks really good as well. You can get a variety of different grille choices here depending on what trim and spec you get. And, you know, in terms of a look standpoint, I think I prefer the Bronco just because it's a little bit more of that retro modern versus this is just kind of a good looking pickup truck. I just like the fact that this has a throwback to the, 60s and 70s Broncos. Now, in case you're wondering about size, this is about 210 inches in length with this crew cab configuration versus this with this 4-door configuration is about 191 inches. So you're looking at about a difference of about 1.5 feet with the Frontier being a little bit longer than the Bronco. Now, jumping inside the Frontier, a really nice interior overall. You do have some hard touch plastics here, but everywhere your elbow is going to be placed, you're going to have some soft touch materials. You do also have some really nice lava red trim pieces in here, kind of giving it a unique look because this is the Pro-4x. This is the top of the line trim level. So you do have some unique and kind of bespoke trim pieces for this trim level, and I like the way it looks. I really like these leather seats. They look really nice. In terms of comfort, they're not the best in my personal opinion, but I think they are probably one of the best looking that are in the mid-size truck segment. Climbing inside, this is just a quick look at what the interior looks like. You've got your conventional Nissan steering wheel. You've got your analog with digital display over here. You got your air vents. This is all hard touch plastic up here, but again, that is kind of common amongst the mid-size truck segment. You do have a softish material over here with some fake contrast stitching over there with the lava red. And then this is your infotainment screen. You know, everything is really easy to reach, very simple, very utilitarian. You have your dual zone climate control down here, just some buttons down here we'll talk about in just a minute in terms of technology, some more storage compartments. And so, you know, it's a pretty attractive looking interior. I can't say it's, you know, phenomenal or luxurious, but again, this is a pickup truck. It's not meant to be that way. And I think for being a pickup truck, it is pretty luxurious with these leather touch surfaces, soft touch materials. Now let me show you what the second row looks like. Climbing back here, not much more to report. You do have pretty much similar materials over here on the door panel, and then the same type of seats. They look really nice. I like the textured pattern over here. You do also have a center armrest with 2 cup holders, and then you do have USB ports back here along with a household power outlet. It's actually a 400 watt power outlet. But other than that, that is kind of a look at the second row. This vehicle does also come with a sunroof, but that is not a standard option. That's just upgraded with this particular vehicle that I'm sitting in today. Unfortunately, you don't have any rear air vents. That's not even an option, but not very many other mid-size pickup trucks actually offer that for the second row passengers. Okay, now jumping into the Bronco, a little bit of a different interior. First of all, you do have a frameless glass here because, well, this window will fold down and you can remove the doors, which you can't do in the Frontier. But, you know, similar hard touch plastics here. In fact, this has more hard touch plastic than the Frontier. You do have a small little soft touch surface over here, but other than that, anywhere your elbow is going to touch is going to be hard touch plastic. The seats also not as nice. Again, keep in mind, mine is not the top of the line trim level, and we'll talk about pricing here in just a minute, but they are cloth seats. I do think these are more comfortable to sit in than that in the Frontier, although maybe not as nice to look at. They don't have any crazy patterns to it, but I do like the sandstone with the black color, and they do have pretty good support overall. Climbing inside, let's take a look at the interior. You also kind of have a digital with analog display in the Frontier. It's a little bit differently arranged than it is here in the Bronco. This is the look at the steering wheel. Lots of buttons over here, really rubberized material. This is also a very utilitarian looking interior, and again, kind of an homage to some of the previous generation Broncos. You got your air vent over there with your grab handle, and then a lot more of that hard touch plastic. Very similar in that aspect to the Frontier, although I will say this plastic, you almost kind of have a poorer quality to it. You can even see some of the places where they've cut the plastic parts. I think the Frontier's plastic quality is a little bit better, although, you know, it's kind of hard to say, but I just don't really love the quality of this plastic. I do like the sandstone color here, though. Again, more of that rubberized material. There's a look at the passenger side. I do like how this Bronco is kind of embossed into this plastic trim piece. More air vents over there. And then this is the smaller screen. This is only the 8-inch touchscreen, but you can get a larger size on the Bronco, which we'll talk about in a moment. But, you know, the interior is pretty decent overall. Down here, very similar to the Frontier, you got dual zone climate control, just some quick access buttons, more storage compartments, and then, you know, the interior is pretty plain, but again, it's meant to be more durable, more utilitarian, and I think the Frontier probably has slightly nicer use of materials, but again, that really comes down to the pricing. Now let me show you what the second row looks like. So taking a look at the second row, again, very similar to the first row. And then this is the same look at the seats. You don't have a center armrest in this, which is kind of odd. I believe if you get the higher trim levels with the leather seats, you will get a center armrest and cup holders, but there's not really any cup holders in the second row aside from using this netting over here, which doesn't really function very well for like open cups or anything like that. Over here, very similar story to the Frontier. You do have some USB ports underneath this little tab over here, and then you do have a household power outlet, also 400 watt max. I've used this before, works really well. And you have your window switches. Again, you don't actually have any air vents back here. They don't include that on the Bronco either. That's actually one of the things I dislike about it, especially because there are other full-size SUVs that do offer rear air vents, but, you know, nonetheless, a pretty good look overall. And like I said earlier, these are very comfortable seats to sit in. Finally, we'll take a look at the truck bed, which, you know, the tailgate is dampened, which is really nice. You do have some places here, what I believe is for cup holders, but taking a look at this bed liner, feels really good, very durable. You do have some lighting controls back here, and you also have what Nissan calls the Utilitrack system, where you can actually unhook these little tabs over here and slide them around so that you can tie down cargo in different sections of the bed, which is actually a really smart idea. You also have a household power outlet back here, so really usable trunk. I think is probably one of the most usable ones out of the mid-size truck segment, aside from what's coming out here in the upcoming 2023 Colorado. Now, climbing into the trunk of the Bronco, this is kind of a heavy door that stops halfway, and you kind of have to put a little bit of force to it to open it up all the way, but you can open it almost like 180 degrees. I mean, that's a pretty wide opening right there. Mine, again, is the soft top, so this has to be lifted by pulling up on these tabs and then pushing up the entire thing. Let me show you what that looks like right now. And there you have it. It is a two-handed operation for sure. That's why I think the hardtop's actually a little bit better, because it will just lift up a piece of glass. But not a bad place overall. There's not really anything to report back here. You do have one light over here and a cigarette-style power outlet, and just some storage cubbies over here on the left and a little bit on the right-hand side. But a pretty plain trunk area overall. Definitely no power outlets or anything like that, but you can fold down these seats, and even though you have a little bit of a lip, you can expand the amount of cargo space you have in the trunk area. Okay, next up, let's talk about pricing. What's interesting here is, like I said earlier, this Ford Bronco Big Bend that I have is kind of on the lower end of the tier level versus this, the Pro-4x. This is the top of the line Frontier. So, you know, comparison-wise, it's a little bit different, but when it comes to pricing, they're actually more similar than you think. This particular vehicle, when I bought it new in 2021, was about $42,000-ish. This one, window stickers, around $46,000. So they are pretty similar, and the Pro-4x actually starts at $38,000, so you can get them almost identical in terms of price, but they do have different features and such, which we'll talk about in today's video further along. But I want to start talking with the Frontier pricing in general. The Frontier starts at $29,000 for the rear-wheel drive king cab configuration and goes all the way up to $38,720 for the Pro-4x. And like I said, you can go up from there with a few extra packages, versus the Ford Bronco, which actually starts at $31,300 for the two-door in the base trim, but then it can go all the way up to $53,895 for the Everglades. Now, you can actually get it up to $68,500 if you pick the Raptor, but I'm going to put the Raptor in kind of a different category. It's not really the same. It has its own different suspension and powertrain, and so I don't really put that into the same category as this type of vehicle. So the highest price for the Bronco for this comparison is about $54,000. One thing I will note is the base price for this at around $31,000 includes four-wheel drive as standard, whereas this includes rear-wheel drive, and you have to pay a few $1,000s extra to get four-wheel drive. So once you start getting the base one in this with four-wheel drive and the base one in this, you're looking at a very, very identical MSRP. Okay, now I want to talk about storage, which is where the Frontier actually kind of wins. You not only have a lot of space in this door pocket over here, but then you also have a pretty large compartment in front of the gear selector. But then you also have this wireless charging pad, which you can technically use for, you know, putting your wallet here or something like that, a little bit of extra storage. Then you have a pretty massive center arm console over here for a mid-size pickup truck. You can definitely fit a lot of different things in there. Of course, you have a glove box, but that doesn't stop there. You actually go into the second row, and aside from the door pocket here, you actually have under seat space as well. And if this one didn't have the upgraded audio system, underneath the driver's side rear seat would also have more storage space, but really convenient use of storage space for a pickup truck. Jumping into the Bronco, you have very limited door pocket space. I mean, it's just this little net over here, and then you do have a similar arrangement where you have a pretty decent sized storage compartment in front of the gear selector. Your center arm console is somewhat, you know, pretty comparable in size. It's pretty deep overall, but other than that, you don't really have anything else. Mine doesn't have a wireless charging pad or anything like that. It does have a glove compartment, of course, but in the back, there's really no storage space whatsoever. Again, you have a little door pocket over here that's netted. And then you do have some space where you can slide some stuff, like I have some towels down there underneath the seat, but it's not really the same type of space. I do like that they included that, so you could actually fit some stuff in here, but if you ever had to fold down the seat or anything like that, it's just gonna get in the way. And the stuff can kind of bounce around back here, so it's not truly additional storage space, but it is nice to have. But when we're talking about storage, I think the Frontier has more usable space inside. Now, if we're talking headroom and legroom, that's a different story. I'm sitting in the Frontier right now, and I've only got a couple inches of space above me. Nissan says there's about 39 inches of headroom in the first row, and then let me show you what the legroom looks like in the second row. Okay, here's me sitting behind myself, and you know, there's just a couple inches of space. Nissan says you have about 33.2 inches of legroom back here. What I will say though is that your seating position is pretty upright, and you know, my knees are actually pretty close to my chest. If you take a look, you know, it's not the most comfortable seating position. Now, jumping inside the Ford Bronco, I have gobs of space up here. I mean, we're looking at like 6 inches of space above my head. Part of the reason is because this is the soft top, but Ford says you have about 43.3 inches of headroom in the first row in the soft top. There have been many times in the Frontier over the last week that I've kind of sat in and adjusted myself and hit my head on the ceiling. That's never happened in this Bronco. So this is what it looks like, me sitting behind myself. Definitely a few more inches of space. V6. And Ford says you have about 36.3 inches of legroom back here, and I can believe it. And the seats are just a little bit more comfortable. They're angled a little bit more down. The seat back is angled a little bit better. And so I have a little bit more support in the thigh. My knees aren't as close to my chest as they were in the Frontier. I personally prefer the seating position in the second row in the Bronco as compared to the Frontier. Okay, next, let's talk powertrains. Starting off with the Nissan, you only have one engine and transmission option. It is a 3.8 liter naturally aspirated V6 that produces 310 horsepower and 281 pound-feet of torque. All of that power is sent through a conventional torque converter 9-speed automatic transmission. Now, in case you're wondering fuel economy, you're looking at 17 in the city, 22 on the highway for a combined 19, and this thing will do 0 to 60 in just about 7.5 seconds. Okay, now under the hood of the Ford Bronco is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Our first thing I do want to mention is that you do have to have a peg to hold up the hood on the Ford Bronco versus the Frontier, which does have hood struts. That's kind of a nice thing from the Frontier. But starting off under the hood here, my particular version has the 2.3 liter EcoBoost 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that produces about 300 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque when you're using premium grade fuel. Now, there's a variety of different options on the Bronco. You can also get this vehicle with a 2.7 liter EcoBoost turbocharged V6 that produces about 330 horsepower and 415 pound-feet of torque. So a very significant amount of torque higher than the 2.3 liter I have in my vehicle. And then there's also the Raptor engine, which I'm not even going to mention. That's a 3.5 liter. But those two engines, the 2.3 and the 2.7, are what you can get on the Bronco. Now, in terms of the transmission, you can either get the 10-speed automatic that I have in my particular vehicle, or you can get a 7-speed manual. Now, in terms of fuel economy, it really depends on your trim level, your engine, your transmission, your wheel and tire setup, but you can get as high as 22 on the highway and as low as 17 in the city. So a pretty comparable amount of MPG as the Frontier, but you're looking at two different types of engine options, whereas this is naturally aspirated, this is only turbocharged regardless of what engine option you pick. Now, in terms of 0 to 60, as I'm sure you can guess, again, it depends on what engine and transmission, but you can get probably in the mid to high 6-second range if you choose the 2.7 liter V6. Mine is probably a very similar 0 to 60 as the Frontier, probably around 7.5 seconds. Now, I do briefly want to mention my experience with the power delivery between both these vehicles. Personally, I kind of like the turbocharged forced induction platform that the Ford Bronco rides on, especially at the elevation I am at here in Utah, around 5,000 feet above sea level. I find that around 0 to 30, the Frontier is actually pretty wickedly quick. When you stomp on the accelerator, it actually kind of throws your head back into the seat rest, but as soon as you hit about 30 miles an hour and you try to pass somebody on the freeway or even just in city streets, 30 to 50, it struggles a little bit to kind of downshift and get into the right power range just because there's not as much oxygen at this elevation versus the forced induction on the Bronco. 0 to 30, you've got that turbo lag, but on the freeway or just 30 to 50 miles an hour, this thing actually hauls really quick. I've never had any issues with this smaller 2.3 liter riding on 35-inch wheels and tires. I think this is plenty of power, and I think between the two, just given my height above sea level, I prefer forced induction with this turbocharger just because it's a little bit easier to drive and pass people on the freeway. Okay, next let's talk technology. I'm going to be bouncing between these two. Starting off with the Frontier, like I may have mentioned earlier, you do have a 9-inch touchscreen over here. Really good software. I do think I like the Ford software a little bit better because it's a little bit snappier, but I think it's a pretty good software overall. Very easy to use, very easy to understand. This is the upgraded 9-inch touchscreen. The lower base models have an 8-inch touchscreen, but nonetheless, pretty good size overall. You do have a 7-inch instrument gauge cluster display over here. I should mention that this does have wireless Apple CarPlay, but only wired Android Auto. But you also have a 360-degree camera, which is nice to have for a pickup truck, especially when you're off-roading. You've also got a wireless charging pad, like I noted earlier. You also have heated seats over here for the front driver and passenger side, and then you also have a heated steering wheel. Now, again, this is not all standard tech, but you can get it optioned with all of this stuff. Pretty much all of the tech that you could ever really ask for in a modern pickup truck. As we're jumping out of the Frontier, I do want to mention this does have the upgraded 10-speaker Fender audio system, and, well, quite a coincidence, but you can also get the Ford Bronco option with a 10-speaker Bang & Olufsen sound system. I think they're both probably pretty good. Maybe an audiophile would say otherwise. Now, jumping into here, you have an 8-inch touchscreen on my particular version, but the one advantage the Bronco has is you can get up to a 12-inch touchscreen on the interior. You can also get a wireless charging pad similar to the Frontier. You can still get heated seats, which my vehicle has. You can also still get a heated steering wheel, again, very similar to the Frontier. Another advantage advantage this touchscreen has is you have wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, and you can still get a 360-degree camera, although I don't have that on this particular vehicle right here. And then taking a look at this instrument gauge cluster display, I don't know the exact specific size of this. I think it's a little bit larger than that in the Frontier, or at least a little bit more colorful. You do have quite a bit of options here, but you know, it's kind of subjective. Now, one advantage you do get with the Bronco that you have to option for in the Frontier is every Bronco comes standard with remote start. And there's a quick look at what the Ford key looks like, pretty standard. Versus the Nissan, if you want to get remote start, you're gonna have to upgrade, and that's what this particular vehicle does have, but it's not a standard feature on all Nissan Frontiers. And there is a look at what the Nissan key looks like. Next, let me talk about safety features. Now, both of these are very comparable in terms of safety. You can get either one of them with adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, emergency braking, pedestrian detection, and lane departure warning. But I will say the Bronco takes it a little bit of a step further, because the Bronco also has lane keeping assist, where it will try to actually push you back into the lane. It won't center you down the lane. It doesn't actually have lane centering, but it will kind of bounce you left and right and try to keep you within the lanes, versus the Frontier just has the lane departure warning, where if you cross a lane, it'll just beep at you. It won't actually try to guide you back into the center of the lane. Okay, now for the next few items, we're going to be talking about off-road capabilities. And before you automatically assume that the Bronco is the winner, I'm going to tell you the Pro-4x actually has quite a few off-road goodies that make it pretty comparable to the Bronco. Now, starting off with the suspension, you do get Bilstein off-road suspension on the Frontier Pro-4x. And you know, you may think that's quite a coincidence, because the Bronco, if you get the Sasquatch package, also comes with a very similar Bilstein suspension. Now, these are position sensitive dampers, and I don't believe that is the same on the Frontier. So these Bilstein shocks are likely a little bit more capable. I'm curious if anybody really knows the answer to that down in the comments below, but they do both come with Bilsteins. They're just a different type of setup. And I will say these seem to ride a little bit smoother on the road, to be honest, than this. And for those of you that are not aware, this is actually not a Sasquatch trim level, but what I did was I upgraded to the Sasquatch wheel and tire setup, and I also upgraded to the Sasquatch suspension. I made a video documenting this whole process, so if you guys are interested in a similar conversion, be sure to check out those videos. I'm going to try to throw them up on the screen, but I will say this rides a little bit bouncier than this thing, which is surprising, because you know, pickup trucks typically bounce a little bit more than full-size SUVs, even though this is pretty much based on the Ranger platform, so it is essentially a pickup truck. Next, let's talk wheels and tires. The Frontier with this upgraded trim level comes with these 17-inch beadlock style, they're not beadlock capable, wrapped around Hankook Dynapro all-terrain tires. Now, in case you're wondering about the dimensions here, they're actually 265/70 R17s. And what that translates to is about a 32-inch wheel and tire setup. Now, jumping over to the wheel and tire setup on my Sasquatch converted Bronco, you're looking at a 17-inch wheel, but you're wrapped around a Goodyear Wrangler Territory MT tire. And in case you're wondering about the dimensions on this, you're looking at a 315/70 R17. And so you're sitting on kind of a fatter tire here, so you got a little bit more tire tread and depth. I mean, I'm sure you can see the size difference here, but these are much more massive on the Bronco and more capable in these 35-inch tire setup. Now, this particular vehicle came with a smaller wheel and tire setup, because like I said, I converted to these Sasquatch ones. It actually came with 33-inch tires, which were a little bit more comparable to those that are on the Frontier. Now, I should mention that the Bronco actually has beadlock capable rims versus the beadlock style on the Frontier. So in terms of wheel and tire setup, these are definitely more capable for off-roading, versus this is a little bit more comfortable for day-to-day driving. Now, in terms of approach angle, you're looking at about 32.3 degrees of approach angle on the Frontier. And then there's several different options on the Bronco. Now, you can get 35.5 degree approach angle on the base trim level, but if you choose the Sasquatch like the one I have, you can get up to 43.2 degrees of approach angle. That's pretty spectacular. In terms of breakover angle on the Frontier, you're looking at 19.6 degrees. Now, on the base Bronco, you're looking at a 20 degree breakover angle, versus on the Sasquatch, you can get up to a 26.3 degree breakover angle. Coming over to the back, you'll notice the departure angles where the Bronco definitely takes the cake, because You know, this isn't a truck bed versus this is. And so you're looking at about 23 degrees on the Frontier. And then on the base Bronco, it's 29.7 degrees, but the Sasquatch is up to 37 degrees departure angle. Now, in terms of ground clearance, it's actually not as big of a difference when you compare the base non-Sasquatch Bronco versus the Pro-4x. You're about 9.5 inches of ground clearance in the front, 9.8 in the back on the Frontier, versus the base Bronco is about 8.3, which is actually kind of low, but then up to 11.5 on the Sasquatch, which is kind of what I have right here. And I gotta say, you need that side step on this because it's kind of hard to get in and out of the vehicle, versus this is a little bit easier, especially for a day-to-day driving standpoint. Now, in terms of lockers, you actually do get a rear locker on the Pro-4x, but even though my particular vehicle doesn't have lockers from the factory, you can get this with front and rear lockers in the Sasquatch trim level, and you can get a sway bar disconnect. So definitely a lot more capability here for rock crawling, but still not too bad on the Frontier with a rear locker. Now, both of these can be optioned with skid plates underneath. So the Pro-4x comes with 3 different skid plates underneath the vehicle, and since mine technically wasn't the Sasquatch, it actually doesn't have any skid plates. That's something I still need to install, but you can obviously get skid plates if you do get the Sasquatch version. Now, I will say one complaint I have about the Frontier in terms of its off-road goodies is this one doesn't really have any off-road modes. I mean, you do have a tow haul mode over here, but other than that, there's nothing that you can kind of shift through or anything like that, aside from pushing your locker over here on the left-hand side down near at the bottom to activate that. It's just kind of, I guess, always in off-road mode, but there's no other, you know, eco or sport mode or anything like that. Really, the only thing you can pull up is this off-road gauge, which actually is pretty nice, and I like the information it gives, but it's just not as robust as what you see in the Bronco. Now, jumping inside the Bronco, you have a similar, you know, off-road gauges and tire pressure, and probably a little bit more info than what you see in the Frontier. But not only that, but you also have these GOAT modes, which depending on what trim level you get, you may have up to, I think, 8 or 9 different GOAT modes, which is go over all terrain. And by cycling through this, you know, not only do you have your normal, eco, sport, you know, just the usual, but you have slippery mode, mud ruts, sand, and then there's even more options if you get the higher trim levels. And so just a lot more usability and functionality here in terms of the drive modes. You do also get a trail turn assist in the Bronco, which essentially brakes the left or right rear passenger wheel to be able to turn a little bit tighter. That's something the Frontier doesn't have. But both of these vehicles do have some sort of trail cruise control, which is essentially, you know, by pushing this button, you can regulate a really low speed cruise control when you're rock crawling or going down a steep slope. Okay, lastly, let's talk about towing capacity and payload. And I think you can guess that the Frontier is going to take the cake here. You're looking at a towing capacity maximum of up to 6,690 pounds on the Frontier, and you can only get up to 3,500 pounds on the Bronco. That's actually one of my biggest complaints, considering this does have a Ranger frame and platform to it. You would expect with the Ranger getting up to, I think, 7,000 pound towing capacity, you could possibly get slightly higher here, but you can't. 3,500 is the max unless you go for the Raptor. In terms of payload, you can get up to 1,590 pounds on the Frontier, and you can get pretty close to around 1,450 pounds on the 4-door Bronco. But in either case, you know, from a truck standpoint, this is more capable in terms of towing and payload. Well, there you have it, folks. That finishes off today's comparison video between the Frontier Pro-4x and the Ford Bronco. Now, I don't think it's a great comparison, but it is somewhat interesting because both of these are pretty off-road capable. You know, I think the Ford Bronco is definitely more expensive, but you do get a lot more standard features like remote start. You know, this thing has heated seats at lower trim levels versus this. You're going to have to upgrade to be able to get some of those functionality. But nonetheless, I don't think you can go wrong with either option. Personally, I would still pick the Bronco, but of course I am biased because this is my Bronco. But I will say I've been impressed with the capabilities of the Frontier. I think from a daily drivability standpoint, this is probably a better choice, plus more practical because you have a 5-foot bed, you can tow more, you can actually put more payload in the vehicle, and I think this is a pretty comfortable ride quality. This, on the other hand, is definitely more capable off-road. It definitely has, I think, a more unique look to it, more throwback than the Frontier, but both are very capable, and I'm glad both exist in today's market. But let me know your thoughts between the two. Which one would you pick and why? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly videos. Also check me out on all the social media down in the description below at Schwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.